The battle for Mosul is on, Iraq's second city, whose occupation 2 years ago put ISIS on the map. Is this the beginning of the end of so-called Islamic State, or another bloody urban quagmire? Good evening. In June 2014, it was the capture of Mosul, with its almost 2 million inhabitants, that forced the world to wake up to the threat of so-called Islamic State. Before then, most of us had never heard of IS. So with the battle to retake Mosul now in full swing, could this spell their end? The Iraqi Prime Minister is confidently, perhaps foolishly, predicting as much. So is the Saudi Foreign Minister on this program tonight. But what is the humanitarian price for victory, and what hope is there for untangling the web of local, regional and global rivalries that have turned Iraq and neighbouring Syria into such a contagious conflict?
Also tonight, 8 men are found guilty of sexually exploiting teenage girls in Rotherham. Their victims were as young as 13. Tonight, when Channel 4 News confronted one of the convicted 2 years ago.
If they come to me and say, right, Mr. Saguier Hussain, we've got proof, we've got hard evidence that you have done so-and-so, then fair enough. I'd put my hands up, I wouldn't even get handcuffed, I'll go with them.
The Russian state broadcaster's bank account is frozen in the UK. Russia today declares it's an attack on freedom of speech. NatWest Bank says it's reviewing the situation. And after she was killed in her own constituency, the main parties aren't contesting Jo Cox's seat out of respect. But when the mainstream doesn't compete, what fills the vacuum?
And remember the heady, dry days of summer when Great Britain became a sporting superpower. Today, Olympians and Paralympians took their medals, their records and their irrepressible good cheer to the rainy streets of Manchester for a victory parade. Now, the hour of victory has arrived. The boast this morning of the Iraqi Prime Minister as government and Kurdish forces launched their major push into the city of Mosul. Islamic State militants have controlled Iraq's second city since 2014 and will not be easily dislodged. But today's offensive does look as if it may be the beginning of the end of IS occupation. At what cost, though? There are believed to be 600,000 residents trapped in the city itself and 1.5 million in the wider Mosul area. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has this report.
After the weeks of build-up, the hours of darkness before the off. For a battle they will assuredly win. Kurdish Peshmerga fighting alongside the Iraqi army for the first time. Before dawn, Iraq's Prime Minister, flanked by the brass, announced the waiting is over. By first light, units were already advancing. But this is the easy bit. Small villages, overwhelming odds, open ground.
Today is a historic day. Today is a turning point in the war against terrorism. For a long time, we have been working on making the plans among the military commanders from the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga forces to defeat Islamic State.
He said all land taken by his forces will remain part of Kurdistan. They'll be listening to that in Baghdad and Washington. But for now, the battle. Yet the day was not without resistance. What's thought to be a suicide truck races towards forward tanks at a village east of Mosul. The Islamic State said it mounted 12 such operations today. Roughly 30,000 Iraqi and Kurdish Peshmerga troops, along with assorted Shia and Sunni militias, have almost completely surrounded Mosul. But the main push for Mosul will come from tens of thousands of Iraqi army, along with Shia militias, moving in from the south. It's thought some kind of escape route west to Syria and the Islamic State heartland will be left open to draw the fight out of populated areas into open ground. The Iraqi army, who infamously legged it in terror when Islamic State showed up in Mosul, is now more of a force after evicting it from Iraqi cities like Ramadi and Fallujah.
Our morale is high. God willing, we will achieve complete victory over Islamic State and the enemies of Iraq, whether that's IS or Turkey. Those who challenge Iraq will have no one to blame but themselves.
Even so, they need these people. French special forces, and alongside them, British, American and Australian counterparts all involved. Overhead, coalition jets are bombing, including the RAF, attempting to find something to hit. But locating targets in a city of 600,000 non-combatants is difficult. Mistakes and civilian bloodshed are guaranteed.
This operation to regain control of Iraq's second largest city will likely continue for weeks, possibly longer.
Leaflets have been dropped over Mosul telling the trapped population to stay indoors for at least some safety. But how to dislodge Islamic State and avoid killing civilians? Mosul could so easily become a mirror image of Aleppo over the border, conventional armies trying to dislodge militias from densely populated cities with bloody consequences. In the city itself, graffiti supporting resistance to IS, but the penalty for anyone caught is, of course, death. And recent days have seen a rash of executions. Large camps are in place for some of Mosul's refugees, and thousands have already fled. But charities warn nothing like enough is there should hundreds of thousands seek shelter. So the battle is underway and victory is certain, but then comes the real struggle. The Iraqi army, the Kurdish Peshmerga, brothers in arms for now with a common enemy. But how will the spoils of war be carved up in and around Mosul when that time comes?
Alex Thompson. Well, earlier I spoke to Adel Al-Jubeir, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, one of the key powers in the region. They're backing rebels in Syria, but also fighting a war in Yemen, where they're facing increasingly strident criticism. I began, though, by asking him whether ISIS was now losing the war.
ISIS will lose this war. There's no doubt about it. The international coalition has the resources, it has the men, it has the money, it has the technology, it has the will. At the end of the day, this is a contest that ISIS will not, cannot win, period. It's a matter of time.
But Sunni extremism can morph into another shape, can't it? And re-emerge as another organization, just as ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda, something else might come out of ISIS. And the problem that creates Sunni extremism has not gone away.
We are doing everything we can to fight extremism. I don't believe there's any country in the world that is more committed or more determined or has more effort to do this than the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We cannot allow people to hijack our faith. We cannot allow people to take a peaceful religion, all religions are peaceful, and turn it into a way to justify violence. At the end of the day, Saudi Arabia is at the crosshairs of these extremist organizations because Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam and home of the two holy mosques.
Okay, let's talk about Yemen. The appalling tragedy, the bombing of the funeral, 140 dead, 500 people injured. You've now apologized, haven't you?
We have, we've looked into it. Investigation is still ongoing. The preliminary results show that there was a faulty intelligence, that there was a disregard of the protocols and procedures for taking strikes, that the problem was with the high command in Yemen and with the command center in Yemen.
That's a terrible mistake to make, isn't it? I mean, these are procedural problems that have resulted in 140 innocent civilians getting killed.
It's a terrible tragedy. Whoever is responsible for the death of 140 people must be held accountable. There is no but, if, where, or what.
By apologizing, you've kind of led the way on this. Do you now want, or would you expect that British companies, if they supplied weapons that were used in this attack, should also apologize?
No.
Why not?
Because we're the client and we're the customer. We purchased the equipment from Britain, and the equipment was used in a legitimate war in accord with international humanitarian law. A terrible mistake happened, and the mistake is being investigated. and we will make amends.
I take it then that this is confirmation that British weapons were used in this particular attack.
I can't confirm what the weapons are that were used, but it's part of the investigation. It will come out.
But I mean, it's either British or American weapons, isn't it? That's mainly what you're dealing with
Whatever
here.
the weapons are that are being used in Yemen, they are used in accordance with international humanitarian law, in a legitimate war of self-defense, in a legitimate war to defend the legitimate government of Yemen. This is not an illegal war.
You've been engaged now, the coalition has been engaged in Yemen for 18 months, and you still haven't defeated the Houthi rebels, who are much less well armed. I mean, that shows you the limitations of your military power, doesn't it?
I don't think so. ISIS in Syria and Iraq, a coalition of more than 60 countries, including the world's great powers, the US, Britain, France, Germany, Australia, more than 60 countries, have been waging a war against ISIS in Syria for the last 2 years. And they have not, and ISIS still controls 37% of Syria.
So this is about the limitations of military power in that part of the world. And you're discovering a lesson that the Americans learned to their own cost in Iraq and to some extent in Syria.
I think that the operations against the Houthis in Yemen have been fairly successful. Most of the country now is no longer under the control of the Houthis. The government forces are gaining momentum. Many of the large cities in Yemen have been liberated from the Houthis. So we see progress. It's not stagnant. But we hope that this matter can be resolved at the negotiating table, not on the battlefield.
Well, to discuss Iraq, I'm now joined from Erbil in northern Iraq by the head of the International Rescue Committee in the country, Alexander Milutinovich. Mr. Milutinovich, what are your concerns for civilians in Mosul at the moment?
Well, we are very concerned about the plight of civilians and the civilian population of the Mosul city. With no escape routes, with no safe routes, people are really risking their life to be caught in crossfire, and they're risking their lives to be leaving the city at this dangerous moment.
Now, we understand up to 1.5 million people may be affected. That's the UN's estimate. Are you expecting a sort of mass exodus of people trying to leave the city?
We expect in the first week of fighting around 200,000 people to leave the city, and we expect this to be one of the worst man-made humanitarian crises in the recent years, where up to 1 million people will be affected and 700,000 will be in need of humanitarian assistance.
Well, have preparations been made then for these people who are going to be displaced?
We're rushing against the time. We are doing the best we can as the International Rescue Committee and as a humanitarian community to provide for these people. We have prepared cash, blankets, and assistance for 60,000 people. And if we receive additional support, financial support, we would be able to respond to 90,000 people in the few weeks of the operation. So the situation is very dire, and we need all the support and assistance we can get.
Would you like to see the creation of safe corridors? And if so, who should be responsible for that?
The safe corridors are a very tricky question right now, because those corridors, once announced, can be used to attack civilians. So we are calling on all sides of the conflict to actually respect and protect civilians, and we want to ensure that they're safe and they can reach safety as soon as possible. But the safe corridor at this moment are something very concerning, and we are really concerned that if they're announced, they might be attacked. Civilians might be attacked.
And as you say there is the concern that civilians may be used as human shields. What can be done to mitigate that?
We are doing everything we can. We are trying to ensure that the civilians reach safety as soon as possible. We are hearing stories that ISIS might be pushing around 200,000 people and expelling them towards military in order to slow down their campaign. So if this thing happens, we are going to be facing a very big humanitarian crisis and potential for a lot of civilians to be hurt. So we are working with all sides, and we are trying to ensure that we can protect civilians and that we can bring them and provide assistance as soon as they reach safety and get out of the front line.
Alexander Milutinovich, thank you very much.
8 men have been found guilty of sexually exploiting teenage girls in Rotherham, 13 years after the original allegations of abuse. Sheffield Crown Court was told that one of the men's victims and her family moved abroad because of threats made to them after they reported the abuse to police, MPs and social services. Channel 4 News interviewed one of the convicted men 2 years ago when the Rotherham scandal first emerged. Here's Paul McNamara.
For 5 weeks, they've arrived in court hiding their faces. For more than a decade, they hid their vile crimes. The men who once meted out abuse in Rotherham with impunity are tonight in prison.
These were horrific crimes. We're talking about the sexual abuse and rape of children. Let's be clear, these victims were just 13 years old. I cannot put into words how the victims have suffered as a result of this abuse. But I'm so grateful that these brave women have chosen to put their trust in us and given evidence in a court of law, resulting in these convictions of 8 very, very dangerous sexual offenders.
Those 8 offenders preyed on their victims on the streets of Rotherham. One girl told the court how she was first approached at just 13 by a man she thought cared for her. He forced her to have sex, he assaulted her and passed her around his friends. That man was Sagir Hussain, who spoke to Channel 4 News 2 years ago while he was under investigation. We asked him why he thought there were such high levels of reported abuse in Rotherham.
You've got young, vulnerable little girls going into clubbing at stuff ages like that, and they're ending up going with blokes and stuff like that. They're waking up next morning and they scream rape or groomed.
We then told him we had heard allegations of abuse by him.
If they come to me and say, right, Mr. Sagir Hussain, we've got proof, we've got hard evidence that you have done so and so, then fair enough. I'll put my hands up, I wouldn't even get handcuffed, I'll go with them.
Did you ever have sex with a girl that you subsequently learnt was underage?
No, nothing whatsoever.
Everything he said was a lie. And today he was found guilty, albeit 13 years after the offences. So why so long?
There are elements to this trial similar to child grooming cases across the country. Older men preying on young girls, flattering them with attention they just weren't used to, giving the girls gifts as they saw it of alcohol and drugs, earning their trust and their debt before abusing them. But this case also follows a pattern of local authorities falling desperately short in their duty of care, and police officers who did not appear to take the rape of young teenagers, children, seriously.
Today we asked South Yorkshire Police about some of the most serious failings exposed in this trial.
A 13-year-old girl comes to police, says I've been raped, she's examined, bruises are found, some samples are taken, and within days that evidence goes missing. I mean, how does evidence like that go missing?
Well, they're obviously very serious matters that are being looked into now by the IPCC in relation as to what action South Yorkshire Police did and didn't take at that time, and we will fully comply with the IPCC and support them in any investigation.
The failures in this case have been looked at by the police watchdog, but they're not alone. The Independent Police Complaints Commission is currently carrying out 56 investigations into allegations of how South Yorkshire Police dealt with grooming in Rotherham. They involve 26 officers and include allegations of corruption. The National Crime Agency has taken over the criminal investigation and is currently looking at 38 suspects involving 133 victims, and they admit the eventual totals will be extremely large. This will not be the last case of grooming in Rotherham. More trials are set. But for tonight, 3 brave women who lived with their abuse for more than a decade have finally seen justice.
Well, as that verdict was coming through, the chair of the National Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse was announcing she planned to limit the number of public hearings it would hold. Professor Alexis Jay, who previously led the inquiry in Rotherham, said that if she pursued a one-size-fits-all approach to all 13 areas of investigation, her panel would never finish its task. She's launched an internal review to ensure that the bulk of the work can be completed by the end of 2020. Jane Deeth has this report.
It's supposed to be an inquiry into institutional child sexual abuse, from children's homes to Westminster, from the church to the armed forces. But is it now lowering its sights? The 4th chair, Professor Alexis Jay, said today some of the investigations won't take the form of public hearings, raising fears they'll be reduced to paper exercises.
If we were to pursue the traditional public hearing model that people associate with inquiries of this kind to the thousands and thousands of institutions in England and Wales, we would fail. So there's no possibility that we can do that. However, we will apply it to some, but that will not be the main ways in which we will take this inquiry forward.
Alexis Jay says she isn't reducing the scope of the inquiry, but some institutions investigated for failing to prevent abuse won't be held to account in public. Peter Saunders is on the Victims and Survivors panel. He says the inquiry's got now to be realistic.
Given the scale of the problem, I mean the scale of child abuse across thousands of institutions in this country, it's little surprise that there will be some that will, if you like, will escape the spotlight. But at the moment, nobody knows who those institutions are, and of course, because it's a statutory inquiry, all institutions have to comply with any requests that come from the inquiry.
But it won't reassure some survivors groups who think the whole inquiry is a cover-up and are threatening to pull out. The last chair of the inquiry, Dame Lowell Goddard, pulled out and then had to deny claims of misconduct and making racist remarks. Today, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, had to deny she may have been being economical when she said the judge quit because she was lonely.
To echo any further allegations which are now likely to be the subject of legal dispute would have been entirely inappropriate.
The inquiry's new approach promises historical abuse will be uncovered sooner. Meanwhile, Sir Cliff Richard came to Parliament to appeal for obscurity for those suspected of sexual abuse unless they're charged. He was named at the start of an investigation which was dropped. Campaigners say naming suspects is a rare option which helps victims come forward.
Stephen Woolfe, the man who unsuccessfully tried to stand for the UKIP leadership this summer and was then treated in hospital after a clash with a party colleague when he was favoured for a rerun, has announced that he's quitting the party. In a statement this evening, he said that UKIP was, quote, riddled with infighting and ungovernable without Nigel Farage as leader. Well, our correspondent Kieran Jenkins is in Westminster. Kieran, tell us more.
Well, having been on the receiving end, he says, of a smack to the head, Stephen Woolfe has tonight dealt UKIP a pretty severe blow. Not only is he not standing in the leadership contest, he is leaving UKIP. Remember, this is one of UKIP's most recognisable, most senior figures. It all comes after an alleged bust-up with Mike Hookham, another UKIP MEP in Strasbourg, alleged because Stephen Woolfe says he punched him. Mike Hookham says he did not. The upshot tonight is Stephen Woolfe saying that not only that he can't govern the UKIP, but that UKIP itself is ungovernable.
I am withdrawing my application for leadership of UKIP. I'm withdrawing my name from UKIP, and I'm now going to stand as an independent MEP to allow myself to get out of the quagmire that has become the infighting, the bitterness, and the internecine warfare that's just going on, that's making the whole party ungovernable and actually unfriendly to be in.
Now, Mike Hookham denies any wrongdoing, of course, but this is an extraordinary position that UKIP have found themselves in just a few months after riding high after the referendum. Then Nigel Farage stood down. Then a new leader, Diane James, quit after 18 days. And tonight, Stephen Woolfe, who is regarded by many as a rising star within the party, somebody who could take them on, take them to the next level, has himself quit. The old saying goes that divided parties can't win elections. Well, this divided party can't even seem to hold a leadership election.
Kieran, thanks very much. Fatima.
Thanks, Matt. 14 children arrived in Britain today from the Calais refugee camp. All have relatives in this country and have a right to residence. They are among the first of more than 100 who will be coming over the next few weeks. Warwick O'Brien has this report.
This is what reuniting families looks like. Two teenage brothers arrived from Calais. Meet their father at St Pancras Station last week. This week, ahead of camp demolition, the process of relocating under-18s goes into overdrive. A busload of 14 young men arrive in South London this morning from the jungle camp. Their reception, typically British. Polite applause. Sorry. No, it's okay. When you've waited this long to see your brother, the minutes just before you do feel the longest. Why are you here today?
I just come to see my brother who come from Calais, from difficulties. So just lovely.
When was the last time you saw your brother?
I've been saw him from last 11 years ago. 11 years ago.
11 years ago was the last time you saw your brother?
Last time I saw my brothers. So I will see him after 11 years. It's a lovely day for me.
Asif says he left Tora Bora on the Afghan-Pakistan border in 2006. His little brother Emil arrived from the jungle Calais this morning. He's 14.
I just want to say thanks to UK government to receive us children from Calais, and thanks everyone who was involved in this case, in this issue. It's lovely. It's lovely. I'm just wanting to see my brother.
On cue, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. Churches and charities have been lobbying the Home Office for months to fast-track this relocation. How sure are you that all of these children's claims are legit?
They've already been scrutinised by the Home Office, and I think that's what we need. We need a dependable process for that. Nobody's saying that we just sign blank cheques. We do want a process that examines claims, that checks that family relationships are real ones. That's what's happening. We need it to be in operation more extensively and more professionally within the next few days, because the clock is ticking here.
And the clock is ticking. For Helen, for example, the young woman from Ethiopia we met last week, still stuck in the jungle. For Lala Ra, ditto. Shafi, when did you arrive here in the jungle? The system has worked, though, for other children we've been following. Earlier this year, we met Shafi from Afghanistan. Last week, the family friend looking after him told us he'd been reunited with his uncle in Britain. How is he? Have you been talking to him recently?
Yeah, I talked to him. He was good. It's like he was laughing. Like right now, I'm good. You know, I can go everywhere. I can play football with the kids.
Up to 200 children will arrive in the UK over the coming couple of weeks. There is a process to go through, though, and in the meantime, snatched moments near the end of the Odyssey.
The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson last night hinted at new sanctions against Russia over its actions in Syria. Well, today, the editor-in-chief of Russia Today said that the broadcaster's bank assets had been blocked in the UK. But the British government says it isn't behind the decision. And tonight, NatWest Bank says it was reviewing the situation. Diana Magnay has the story.
And going back now to our top story here on RT International, all of our channel's bank accounts have been blocked in the UK without any explanation.
So according to Russia Today, NatWest has told them they can no longer bank with them. NatWest, part of Royal Bank of Scotland Group, majority owned by the Treasury. A British state bank, which RT says no longer wishes to provide banking services to a Russian state broadcaster. In a letter from NatWest published on RT's website, the bank writes, "We have recently undertaken a review of your banking arrangements and have come to the conclusion that we will no longer provide these facilities. You will therefore need to make alternative banking arrangements outside of the Royal Bank of Scotland Group. Our decision is final." The message from the Prime Minister's office that this has nothing to do with the government, that banks must decide whose money they manage depending on their appetite for risk.
But I would certainly like to see demonstrations outside the Russian embassy.
Given the rebukes that Russia has come in for recently, RT is crying foul.
So it's a very dangerous step to use banking practices in this way to obviously stifle freedom of speech in a country which has no written constitution.
In a comment on her Facebook page, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman said it looked like that in leaving the EU, Britain had left its freedom of speech obligations behind in Europe. But is this really the one big conspiracy that RT would like to suggest?
I think it's much more likely that the NatWest Compliance Department has looked at the RT account and decided that essentially the risks and the rewards don't match up. This is presumably just a payroll operation. It isn't a very profitable account for NatWest to hold, but the reputational risk about being associated with such a controversial organisation is very high.
Russia Today is nothing if not controversial. Owned by the Kremlin and rabidly anti-US, it plays host to a gallery of well-known critics of the West and dedicates a lot of its time to rebutting what it calls the mainstream media, turning the narrative of Russia as perpetrator of war crimes in countries like Ukraine and Syria on its head, even if its staff deny any kind of political directives from the Kremlin. Tonight, though, some confusion. RBS issuing a statement in the last hour saying these decisions are not taken lightly. We are reviewing the situation and are contacting the customer to discuss this further. Perhaps the reputational risk of pulling the plug on RT is causing second thoughts.
Police reinvestigating the disappearance of the toddler Ben Neben 25 years ago say they believe he died as a result of an accident. Ben was 21 months old when he disappeared on the Greek island of Kos. His family are said to be devastated and distraught after detectives told them that they are certain he died close to where he was last seen, though his body was never found.
Now, it's a by-election triggered by the killing of an MP in her own constituency. Out of respect to Labour's Jo Cox, the other main parties decided they would not contest Thursday's Batley by-election. But Labour will be opposed by 9 other candidates. Kieran Jenkins joins us live now from Westminster. Kieran.
Well, under normal circumstances, there would be huge focus on this by-election in Westminster and the media nationally. It would be Jeremy Corbyn's first election since being re-elected as Labour leader. Theresa May's first test in an election as Prime Minister. UKIP, whoever is leading UKIP these days, a test for them also. But this is not a normal circumstance. Nobody wanted this by-election after Jo Cox was killed on June 16th, a week before the referendum. And it's one of the first occasions in modern times, if not the first, that mainstream political parties have not contested a by-election. And into that void, into that space left behind, 9 other candidates have emerged from various fringe parties or standing as independents, many of whom have right or far-right leanings. And that poses certain difficulties in Batley, difficulties for those who perhaps didn't vote Labour last time, wondering who should have their vote this time, with Labour the only mainstream party standing. And difficulties also because some of the issues that are being debated and discussed do raise concerns with some, and some feel that it is causing tensions locally. And of course, this would have been a fascinating by-election, the first test post-referendum of some of those issues raised by the Brexit vote. But it's not going to be that. Instead, as we've been finding out in over a month in Batley, it's an opportunity for those on the fringes to have their voice heard. And in this report, you will hear some strong language.
Assalamu alaikum. It's Friday. Coronation Street actress and EastEnders as well. Tracy Brabin has been the new selected person to stand for the by-election.
You've got a question now. Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
I will be giving my full 101% backing to the Labour candidate. So I don't expect there to be. It'll be just 1 or 2.
There's actually about 9 parties, you know, British National Party, National Front.
You can't account for how people will vote on the day.
Why should our students pay £9,000 a year?
Get the balloons up, that's fantastic.
Why should you have to pay prescription charges?
We will seek justice for all the victims of the grooming gangs in this part of Yorkshire.
They're all here.
What you're doing is clearly wrong. In a town that don't want you. I live here, they don't.
I feel sorry for the people who live here next to you.
You are racist stuff now, get out.
Coming from an anti-Semitic, we don't believe what you say anyway.
We're still upset about Joe. Well, that's where the office was.
Stands for Liberty GP. Vote for Jack Buckby, Liberty GP.
I wish in a way the Conservatives were having a candidate, and then maybe we wouldn't have people like this jumping on bandwagon.
Jack Buckby stands for ending immigration, for tackling the grooming gangs in West Yorkshire, and for putting local people first.
All these people aren't worth a that's honest. They all say they're going to do something and they don't.
Here, look, just a few little things on here, these issues, right? Putting local people first, what do you think about that one?
Yes.
Good. What about power to the people? Yes. Renationalising the public transport and NHS? No more foreign wars?
We shouldn't have any wars altogether.
Right, fair enough. What about stopping immigration?
Yes.
You want to stop it, right, and putting our people to the front of the housing queue. Do you think that's important? Would it surprise you to know that those are British National Party policies?
And this is our candidate here, Dave.
Hello, love.
So there you go. So
I'm standing in the election next Thursday, giving people a choice.
I agree with a lot of what UKIP say, I must admit.
Well, the problem with UKIP, they've achieved their goal of wanting the British people to have a referendum. It's time to let us take centre stage now.
Yeah.
I mean, the real nationalist.
Our party's called Liberty GB, and we've got a fantastic young candidate called Jack Buckby.
So let's try and get the UKIP Tory vote if we can.
We're going to a nice leafy area.
Yeah.
Have you made your mind up? You don't have to tell me. Have you made your mind up who you're voting for yet?
Conservative, no.
No UKIP.
No UKIP.
Just Labour and a few smaller parties.
Well,
like
a few
ours.
nutters, I think.
Oh, we're not nutters. We've got some very sensible policies about,
yeah.
about stopping immigration and tackling the grooming gangs in the Yorkshire area.
I'm wanting to stand in the Batley-Spen by-election on behalf of the English Democrats. Oh, thank you. It's good to see you. You know, without being told that I'm racist because I want to be English. And I think that's a big issue as well. So Brexit and an English identity. So, but what's your little girl's name?
Evie.
Evie.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic name. And of course, look up in the Bible, Genesis, Evie. The first woman and David. David, yes, yeah. Well, I used to teach religious education up the road, so I'm really into stuff like that, names. I think names are important. So.
Are you EDL?
Oh, no. Oh, can you please let people know on the grapevine we're not the EDL? Sorry.
It's just how it looks then.
Yeah, no, so, well, that's the problem, isn't it? Unfortunately, when you've got the Cross of St George, people automatically assume it's something bad, you know.
I felt very angry when these all dropped through my door and I read them. There isn't room here now for re-stirring the hatred.
I think some of the people that are standing are quite divisive. I think they will have a negative effect on the community. God forbid, I hope it never happens. I don't think it'd happen. But if there's a poor turnout, a really poor turnout, it could let in one of the right-wing parties. Or if there was a poor turnout and they got a high vote, it adds weight to their political beliefs.
I used to vote for Labour, but that stopped, it must be 20 years since that stopped. And I don't vote for Labour anymore. I don't vote for anybody anymore.
This country's
Why? Because of the immigrants.
Because of immigrants that's coming in. Of course it is. How can it... What jobs is it for English people?
I used to vote for Labour.
And why did you stop?
Because of that Jeremy Corbyn. He's a load of crap. Absolute crap.
Thank you very much.
I have to say this is the worst and saddest circumstances one would ever want for a by-election. Nobody ever wanted this by-election. The tragedy of the loss of Jo is something that's going to live with us for the rest of our lives. And in her memory, we're going to win. In her memory, we're going to fight for our National Health Service. In her memory, we're going to fight for good, strong communities all over the country. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
Hiya, darling. Tracy Brabin. I'm the Labour candidate, but there are 9 other fringe parties who, it feels to me, that's not who we are. But what we saw as a tragedy, actually, these far-right and other parties have decided it's an opportunity for them to get their division and hatred out there.
Tracy would do a fantastic job for everybody in the whole community,
Are you
I think.
Bellsworth?
I am.
Oh,
I bet you've been
watch
watching
it
Sky.
Can I give you that back, please?
Yeah.
Because
do you have any particular objection to what we're proposing here?
Well, I don't believe that you should be putting up anyway, because Conservatives aren't, Liberals aren't, UKIP aren't, and I don't think you should do. Out of respect for Jo Cox.
Sure, but what about
and I wasn't a Labour supporter, and I'm not. But I just think that.
Can I put it to you that our party, which is strongly opposed to immigration, would halt immigration completely, would deport all illegal immigrants and foreign criminals? Would those policies not appeal to you?
Oh yeah, but you won't get in.
But I don't understand it. You're concerned about immigration. You know that Labour are promoting immigration.
Well, just out of respect.
Out of respect for Jo Cox, and he's just told us that he doesn't respect any of her policies.
That's the mindset that's just... Oh.
I worked for Jo in her office. So as Jo's office is closing, so ends my job. Once the spotlight's off and the election's over, all of the things that have been whipped up, all of the untruths that have been told, all of the problems that will have been compounded and fresh problems caused, we've got to live with that, and it's not a very pleasant prospect.
Look at that. It's perfectly placed, that isn't it?
We're above the Labour Party.
Ain't we always?
There's such an awful irony that in the by-election to find somebody to replace her, if that is even possible, that we end up being inundated with the hatred that caused this by-election. And there's a terrible irony in that, I think.
So as you've seen there, not your usual election campaign. One of the few times that political parties, the main political parties, are absent from an election campaign. Perhaps the first time since 2008, where David Davis, now the Brexit Secretary, stood unopposed. And there is a sense in Batley that has changed the tone of the campaign there. A sense also among the electorate that perhaps now with this election, some of those tensions can at last be resolved. There are 10 candidates standing in the Batley and Spen by-election. You can see a list of all of them on the screen now.
Thanks very much, Kieran. Matt.
Now, it was one of Manchester's wettest afternoons, a stark contrast to the Rio summer they had gathered to celebrate. But the rain did not dampen the spirits of the 150,000 people who lined the route as Britain's triumphant Olympians and Paralympians paraded their medals in the city centre. Our sports correspondent, Kamian Zeram, was there.
What a journey it's been. Olympians and Paralympians from London to Rio to Manchester. Yes, in the rain, but who cares? 2 days of homecoming celebrations started here.
Manchester today and London tomorrow is just so nice to have all these people supporting us, and they supported us during the games, and we just want to thank them all.
And if there is a Paralympic legacy, surely it is Ellie Simmonds' 15-year-old namesake, Ellie Robinson, who'd only just left primary school at the 2012 Games, but went on to beat Simmonds this summer.
It was so surreal. I remember watching her in London 2012, and then now I'm swimming against her in races, and it went so quickly.
And Rio in numbers, 67 Olympic medals, 147 Paralympic medals. Better than Britain had ever done before.
As much as anything, it's a chance to say thank you. And not just for the crowds to say thank you to the athletes, but for the athletes to say thank you to the British people.
They all watched us race, they all cheered for us. Whether we heard them or not, it didn't matter. They were cheering, they were screaming, they were hoping that we won our medals. And they're here now to show their support, and we're showing our support to them in return. It's so good, it's lovely.
Who have you come to see?
We've come to see them all because they've given us such a lot of pleasure this summer. It's been fantastic. So we've just come to give our support.
What do you like about them?
What's the trophy? We like them. I like the gold medals.
Dame Sarah Story knows a thing or two about gold medals. She has 14.
It is a landmark Paralympic gold medal.
In a Paralympic career that started in 1992 and shows no sign of slowing down.
As a female cyclist, endurance cyclist, coming into your peak towards your late 30s and early 40s is not unusual. I went faster in Rio. If I'd not gone quicker, I might not feel as confident about the idea that another 4 years was a possibility.
Another 4 years, music to the ears of this adoring crowd. Tokyo, here we come, the next Olympic and Paralympic Games.
After the break, we talk to the novelist Paul Beatty about his latest novel, which satirises the state of race relations in the United States at the end of the Obama era.
Now, he's been described as the funniest writer in America, but Paul Beattie's novels throw a powerful spotlight on the troubled state of race relations in his country. His latest offering, The Sellout, is a satirical fantasy about a farmer who tries to spearhead a return of slavery and segregation. It's already been shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. He started his interview by reading a passage from the book. Listen.
My father was face down in the intersection. I recognized him by his fist, cocked and knuckled, uptight. I compromised the crime scene by picking lint off his matted afro, straightening the rumpled collar of his Oxford shirt, brushing the pebbles of gravel from his cheek, and according to the police report, most egregiously by sticking my hand in the blood pooled around his body, which to my surprise was cold, not hot, roiling with the black anger and lifelong frustration of a decent, albeit slightly crazy man who never became what he thought he was. You the son?
There's a very moving scene in the book where Albert, the protagonist, finds his father dead on the street. He's been shot by the cops.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I mean, it's very moving indeed. As you were writing it, I mean, these things were happening over and over again. I mean, every week we hear about a police shooting against, in most cases, unarmed black men in America. Is it just that we're noticing it now because it's been written about, or has it always been happening?
Yeah, no, it's always been happening. I mean, I was doing some research once for something else, and I'm flipping through all these old papers from the 30s, and every single day, 3 black kids shot in Harlem in the back for, I don't know, breaking windows or something, and it's just...
So this is an old story.
Yeah, it really hit me, though, reading that. Like, it's so old. And yeah, and I think that's what has to change. I think, there's a ton of things have to change, but the fact that no one's ever been... It's so rare for people to get convicted, for officers to get convicted of these crimes, and that's insane.
Donald Trump polls very, very badly with a lot of people, but especially in the African-American community. When he talks about the blacks and to the blacks, and he says, you've got nothing to lose, life has never been worse for you than it is now. Does anyone take him seriously in the African-American community?
Seriously, it depends what you mean by serious. I mean, everyone knows that it's just posturing, but I think...
Is it working politically for him?
No, I don't think so. Not in terms of people of color. I think, an interesting thing for me about this whole thing, and it kind of shows like the dearth of real engagement with both parties, and in their, quote unquote constituencies. So what he's saying about Democrats and African Americans, I think other people could say about Republicans and the white working class.
And I lived in America for 11 years, and people were always complaining, but this anger
I think it's new on the part of certain people. I think there's, it's new on the part of people who kind of believed that that whoever was in power was serving their interests. And I think kind of since 9/11, people are kind of like, oh yeah, these people really don't care about me and my day-to-day. They just want my vote.
What's going to happen to that after the actual election?
I have no idea.
After you have winners and losers?
I have no idea. There's a real investigation of what American culture is and isn't. And that myth that, we try to propagate, that myth that Trump is trying to propagate, good old days back. The book is about that, this kind of sense of what the good old days were and, how do they still manifest themselves.
But is there any point in imagining in America where racial identity no longer matters in the future? Or is it always going to matter?
Yeah, I think you can imagine it. Sure, why not?
But is it ever a realistic prospect?
It's important to different people at different times in different contexts, And I think one of the things that people are starting to figure out is identity is, it's not immutable. It changes where you are, what day you are, the mood you're in, who you're with, and I think that's starting to happen. And I think it's always been happening, but I think people are a little more cognizant of the fact that, somebody's just not the same no matter who they are.
Paul Beattie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, man.
And some news just in. Yemen's president has agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire with possibility of an extension.
We'll be back tomorrow at 7.
See you then. Thanks for watching. Good evening.
Good evening.